October 15th, 1943. 6 P-38 Lightning fighters sat on the tarmac at Reykjavik Air Base in Iceland, their twin engines gleaming in the pale Arctic sun. Captain Robert Wilson stood beside his aircraft, checking his maps one final time. "Simple milk run," his wingman Lieutenant Brad McManus said, walking over with a grin. "Iceland to England. We'll be drinking warm beer in a London pub by tonight. If the weather holds," Robert said, looking at the sky. Grey clouds were building on the horizon, but the meteorologist had assured them the route was clear. "You worry too much, Cap." Brad clapped him on the shoulder. "What's the worst that could happen?" Robert thought of Sarah, his fiancée, waiting in England. He'd proposed by letter 3 months ago, and her response had finally caught up with him in Iceland. Yes. 1,000 times, yes. "Come home safe so we can start our life together." He'd folded that letter and put it in his breast pocket right over his heart. Tonight he'd see her. Tonight he'd hold her. Tonight everything would begin. "All right, gentlemen," Major Harrison called out, gathering the 6 pilots. "Standard ferry mission. We fly in formation, maintain radio contact, follow the route exactly as briefed. Weather looks good. Any questions?" "Sir, what if we run into trouble?" asked Lieutenant Tommy Chen, the youngest pilot at just 22. "You won't," Harrison said confidently. "This route's been flown 100 times. Just stay in formation and follow Captain Wilson. He'll get you there." The 6 pilots climbed into their cockpits. Robert strapped himself in, ran through his pre-flight checklist, and fired up both engines. The Allison V-1710s roared to life, their sound echoing across the airfield. "Blue Squadron, this is Blue Leader," Robert said into his radio. "Radio check. Blue 2, loud and clear. Blue 3, roger. Blue 4, check. Blue 5, good to go. Blue 6, ready when you are, Cap." Robert looked down the line at the 5 other P-38s, their propellers spinning, their pilots giving him thumbs up. Good men, good pilots. They'd all make it to England together. "Tower, this is Blue Leader requesting permission for takeoff." "Blue Leader, you are cleared for takeoff. Good hunting, gentlemen." Robert pushed the throttles forward. His P-38 accelerated down the runway, faster and faster, until the wheels lifted off the tarmac and he was airborne. Behind him, the other 5 fighters followed in perfect formation. They climbed to 15,000 feet and turned southeast toward England. The coast of Iceland disappeared behind them. Ahead, nothing but ocean and sky. Robert checked his fuel gauge. Full tanks. 8 hours of flying time. The flight to England would take 6 hours, plenty of margin for error. Or so he thought. 30 minutes into the flight, the first snowflakes appeared. "Betatum." The snow started as a few scattered flakes drifting past Robert's canopy. Within 10 minutes, it had become a wall of white that reduced visibility to almost nothing. "Blue Leader, this is Blue 3. Lieutenant Danny Foster's voice crackled over the radio. "I'm getting some ice build-up on my wings." "Copy that, Blue 3. All aircraft, watch your wing loading. If ice gets too heavy, descend to a lower altitude where it's warmer." Robert checked his own wings. Ice was forming along the leading edges, adding weight and reducing lift. Not critical yet, but getting worse. "Blue Leader, this is Blue 5. Lieutenant Marcus Webb called. "My compass is acting funny. I'm getting erratic readings." Robert looked at his own compass. The needle was spinning slowly, unable to lock onto magnetic north. "Confirmed, Blue 5. Magnetic interference. Stay in visual formation. Don't rely on instruments." But visual formation was becoming impossible. The snow was so thick now that Robert could barely see Brad's P-38 flying just 50 feet off his wing. "Blue Leader, recommend we turn back to Iceland," Brad said. "This weather wasn't in the forecast." Robert hesitated. Turn back meant another day's delay, another day before he saw Sarah. But more importantly, turning back meant admitting defeat, and ferry pilots didn't turn back for a little snow. "Negative, Blue 2. We push through. It's just a weather front. We'll be out of it soon." But they weren't out of it soon. An hour passed, then 2. The snow never let up. The ice on the wings grew thicker, and the temperature kept dropping. "Blue Leader, fuel check," Robert called. The responses came back one by one. Everyone was burning fuel faster than planned. The ice on the wings created drag, forcing the engines to work harder. "We're committed now," Robert said. "Not enough fuel to make it back to Iceland. We push forward to England." "Roger that," Brad said, but Robert could hear the tension in his voice. Another hour passed. The storm showed no signs of breaking. Robert's hands were cramping from gripping the control stick so tightly. His eyes burned from staring into the endless white. "Blue Leader, this is Blue 6. Tommy Chen's voice was high with panic. "I've lost visual contact." "I can't see anyone." "Blue 6, maintain heading and altitude. We'll find you." "I don't know my heading. My compass is spinning. I don't know which way is..." "Static. Blue 6, do you copy?" Robert's heart hammered. "Tommy, do you copy?" "Nothing." "Blue 6 is gone," Brad said quietly. "He's not gone," Robert snapped. "He's just out of radio range. He'll find his way." But Robert didn't believe it. Tommy was lost somewhere in the storm, alone, with no way to navigate and fuel running low. "All aircraft, tighten up formation," Robert ordered. "Nobody else gets separated, you hear me? Nobody." "Roger. Copy." "Understood." But the storm had other plans. Mutti, 4 hours into the flight, Robert's fuel gauge read half empty. They should have been over Scotland by now, descending toward their destination. Instead, they were still flying blind through the storm, with no idea where they were. "Blue Leader, I'm picking up something on the radio," Brad said. "Sounds like a distress beacon." Robert switched frequencies and heard it, a faint rhythmic pulse. An emergency signal. "That's a downed aircraft," Lieutenant Danny Foster said. "Someone's in trouble." "Or it's Tommy," Marcus Webb added. "Maybe he went down and activated his beacon." Robert's mind raced. If they followed the beacon, they might find Tommy. But it would take them off course, burn more fuel, and they were already dangerously low. "Blue Leader, what are your orders?" Brad asked. Robert looked at his fuel gauge again. Then he thought of Tommy. 22 years old, probably terrified, possibly injured, definitely alone. "We follow the beacon," Robert said. "We don't leave our people behind." They banked left, following the signal. It grew stronger as they descended through the clouds. At 8,000 feet, the snow finally began to thin. And then Robert saw it. "Oh my God," he whispered. Below them wasn't ocean. It was ice. A massive glacier stretching as far as he could see in every direction, white, flat, and utterly lifeless. "Where the hell are we?" Danny asked. "Greenland," Brad said, his voice hollow. "We're over Greenland. The storm blew us hundreds of miles off course." Robert checked his fuel gauge. The needle was deep in the red. "All aircraft, fuel status." The responses came back, each one worse than the last. Everyone was running on fumes. "We don't have enough fuel to reach England," Marcus said. "We don't even have enough to reach Iceland. Then what do we do?" Danny's voice cracked. Robert looked down at the glacier. It was flat, smooth, covered in fresh snow. It looked almost like a runway. Almost. "We land," Robert said. "Land? On a glacier," Brad said. "Cap, that's suicide. We don't know how thick the ice is. We don't know if there are crevasses. We don't have a choice," Robert interrupted. "We're out of fuel and out of options. We land or we crash. Those are the only two choices." The radio was silent for a long moment. "Blue Leader, this is Blue 4, Danny said quietly. "I'm with you. Let's do this." "Blue 5, Roger." "Blue 2? Yeah. Okay. Let's land this thing." Robert took a deep breath and began his descent. "All aircraft, follow me down. Wheels up landing. Aim for the flattest section you can find. Flare at the last second to bleed off speed. And pray." He dropped lower, lower, the glacier rushing up to meet him. At 50 feet, he pulled back on the stick slightly, leveling out. At 20 feet, he cut the engines. The P-38 hit the snow with a tremendous impact. The world became a blur of white as the aircraft skidded across the ice, throwing up huge plumes of snow. Metal screamed. Something snapped. Robert was thrown forward against his harness. And then, suddenly, everything stopped. Robert sat in the cockpit, breathing hard, his hands shaking. He was alive. He'd landed on a glacier and survived. "Blue 2, status," he called into the radio. "Down safe," Brad replied. "That was the worst landing of my life, but I'm okay." "Blue 4, down. Aircraft damaged, but I'm not hurt." "Blue 5, I'm good. Plane's a mess, but I'm walking away." 3, down safe. 3 to go. Robert popped his canopy and climbed out onto the wing. The cold hit him like a physical blow, easily 30 below zero. In the distance, he could see Brad's P-38 sitting on the ice, its nose crumpled but intact. Then he heard it, a sound that made his blood run cold. An explosion. Robert spun around and saw a fireball rising into the sky about a mile away. Black smoke billowed up against the white landscape. "Who was that?" He screamed into his radio. "Who went down?" Static. "Somebody answer me. Blue leader, this is Blue 4. Danny's voice was shaking. "I saw it. It was Blue 6. Tommy's plane hit hard and exploded. He's gone, Cap." Robert closed his eyes. Tommy Chen, 22 years old, dead, and it was Robert's fault for leading them here. Robert stood on the glacier, watching the black smoke from Tommy's crash rise into the grey sky. Around him, the other 4 pilots gathered. Brad, Danny, Marcus and Lieutenant Jake Morrison from Blue 3, who'd been silent on the radio but had landed safely. 5 men, 5 P-38 Lightnings scattered across the ice, and no way home. "What now, Cap?" Jake asked. He was the oldest of them, at 34, a veteran of North Africa with a wife and 3 kids back in Ohio. "Now we survive," Robert said. "We set up a perimeter, salvage what we can from the aircraft, and wait for rescue." "Rescue?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "Cap, nobody knows where we are. We were supposed to be over the Atlantic heading to England. Instead, we're on a glacier in Greenland. They'll search the ocean, not here. Then we make sure they can find us," Robert said. "We use the emergency radios, we build signal fires, we do whatever it takes." "With what?" Danny gestured at the barren landscape. "There's nothing here, no wood, no shelter, no food, just ice. Then we use the planes," Brad said. "We strip them for parts. Use the fuel for fires, use the metal for shelter, use the survival kits for supplies." Robert nodded. "Brad's right. We've got 5 aircraft full of equipment. We can make this work." They spent the next hour salvaging what they could. Each P-38 had a survival kit with emergency rations, a first aid kit, flares, and a hand-crank emergency radio. They also had parachutes that could be used as shelter, and several hundred gallons of aviation fuel between all the aircraft. But the cold was brutal. Even with their flight suits and jackets, the wind cut through them like knives. Robert's fingers were already going numb. "We need shelter," Jake said, his teeth chattering. "We won't last the night out here." They used parachute silk to create a makeshift tent between 2 of the aircraft, blocking the wind. Inside, they huddled together, trying to share body heat. "How long do you think before they find us?" Danny asked. "Could be days," Robert said. "Could be a week. But they will find us. They'll search every inch of the North Atlantic until they do." "And if they don't?" Marcus asked. Nobody answered. That night the temperature dropped to 40 below zero. The wind howled across the glacier, shaking their parachute shelter. Robert lay awake, thinking about Sarah waiting for him in England, thinking about Tommy Chen's plane exploding, thinking about the decision he'd made to land here instead of trying to reach England. Had he made the right choice? Or had he just killed them all more slowly? "Cap?" Brad's voice came from the darkness. "You awake?" "Yeah?" "You did the right thing, landing here. We'd have crashed into the ocean if we'd kept going. Tommy's still dead." "Tommy's dead because his plane hit wrong, not because of your decision." Brad paused. "We're alive because of you. Remember that." Robert didn't respond. He just stared up at the parachute silk above him and listened to the wind. On the second day, they got the emergency radio working. Robert cranked the handle, generating power, and transmitted their Mayday call. "This is Blue Squadron, U.S. Army Air Forces. We are down on a glacier in Greenland. 5 survivors, requesting immediate rescue. Over." He released the transmit button and listened. Static. He tried again, and again, and again. Nothing. "They're not hearing us," Marcus said. "We're too far from any base." "Then we keep trying," Robert said. "Every hour, on the hour, someone will hear us eventually." But as the days passed and no rescue came, hope began to fade. By the fourth day, they were running low on food. The emergency rations were meant to last 48 hours, not indefinitely. By the fifth day, Jake developed frostbite on his toes. They had no way to treat it except to keep his feet as warm as possible. By the sixth day, Danny stopped talking. He just sat in the shelter staring at nothing. "We're going to die here," Marcus said on the seventh day. "Aren't we?" Robert looked at the four men, cold, hungry, losing hope. He thought about giving up, about accepting that this glacier would be their grave. Then he thought about Sarah, about the letter in his breast pocket, about the promise he'd made to come home. "No," Robert said firmly. "We're not dying here. We're getting rescued, and we're going home." He stood up and walked out into the wind. "Where are you going?" Brad called after him. "To send another message," Robert said, "and this time someone's going to hear it." Day 8 on the glacier. Robert cranked the emergency radio for the 100th time, his arms burning with exhaustion. The hand crank generator was their only power source, and it took 20 minutes of constant cranking to build enough charge for a single transmission. "This is Blue Squadron, U.S. Army Air Forces," Robert said into the microphone, his voice hoarse. "We are down on a glacier in Greenland. 5 survivors, coordinates unknown. Requesting immediate rescue. Over." He released the button and listened. Static, always static. "Cap, you need to rest," Brad said from inside the shelter. "You've been at that radio for 6 hours straight." "Someone has to hear us," Robert said. "Someone has to—" "Blue Squadron, this is Bluey West 1. We read you. Repeat, we read you. What is your status? Over." Robert's heart stopped. He grabbed the microphone with shaking hands. "Bluey West 1. This is Blue Leader. We are 5 pilots down on a glacier. We have 1 fatality, 1 man with severe frostbite, limited supplies. We need immediate evacuation." "Blue Leader, Roger. We have been searching for you for 8 days. Can you give us any landmarks? Anything to help us locate you?" Robert looked around at the endless white expanse. "Negative. Just ice in every direction. We're approximately 6 hours flight time from Iceland, blown off course by storm." "Understood, Blue Leader. We're launching search aircraft now. Can you fire flares?" "Affirmative. We have flares. Fire one now so we can get a bearing." Robert grabbed a flare from the survival kit, ran out onto the ice, and fired it into the sky. The red star exploded against the grey clouds, brilliant and beautiful. "Flare away!" Robert shouted into the radio. "We see it! We see it! Blue Leader, help is coming! Repeat, help is coming! Maintain your position. Search and rescue will reach you within 6 hours. Do you copy?" "Copy!" Robert's voice cracked. "We copy! Thank you! Thank you!" He dropped the radio and fell to his knees in the snow. Behind him he heard the others emerging from the shelter. "They found us?" Danny asked, his voice barely a whisper. "They found us," Robert said, tears freezing on his cheeks. "We're going home." Brad let out a whoop and grabbed Marcus in a bear hug. Jake just sat down in the snow and started crying. Danny stood there, swaying slightly, like he couldn't quite believe it was real. 6 hours later they heard it, the sound of aircraft engines. 2 PBY Catalina flying boats appeared through the clouds, circling overhead. One of them waggled its wings. "Blue Squadron, this is Rescue 1. We have visual contact. We're going to land on the ice. Prepare for evacuation." The first Catalina touched down on the glacier, its hull skidding across the snow. It came to a stop about 200 yards from Robert's position. The side hatch opened, and 3 men in heavy Arctic gear jumped out. "Let's move!" Robert shouted. "Grab whatever you can carry." They helped Jake to his feet. His frostbitten toes made walking agonizing. Marcus and Danny supported him between them while Robert and Brad gathered the survival gear. The rescue team met them halfway, carrying medical supplies and blankets. "How many?" the lead rescuer asked. 5 here, Robert said. 1 fatality about a mile north. His plane exploded on impact. We'll recover him, the rescuer said. Right now, let's get you men out of here. They loaded into the Catalina. The interior was cramped but warm, gloriously, impossibly warm. Someone handed Robert a thermos of hot coffee. He wrapped his frozen hands around it and just held it, feeling the heat seep into his fingers. You boys are lucky, the pilot said as they taxied for takeoff. Another day or two and we might not have found you in time. What about our aircraft? Brad asked. The P-38s. We'll send a recovery team, the pilot said, but it'll have to wait until spring. Can't land heavy equipment on the glacier in winter. The Catalina's engines roared to life. They accelerated across the ice and lifted into the air. Robert looked out the window at the 5 P-38 Lightnings scattered across the glacier. His aircraft, Brad's, Danny's, Marcus's, Jake's, and somewhere in the distance, Tommy's burning wreckage. We'll come back for them, Robert said quietly. We'll come back. But as the glacier disappeared behind them, he had no idea it would be 60 years before anyone saw those aircraft again. Dodgersen, October 30th, 1943. Bluey West 1 Air Base, Greenland. Robert sat in the base hospital while a doctor examined his hands. The frostbite wasn't severe, he'd keep all his fingers, but the doctor said he'd have nerve damage for the rest of his life. You're grounded for at least a month, the doctor said. Maybe longer. Those hands need time to heal. What about the others? Lieutenant McManus and Lieutenant Foster are fine. Lieutenant Webb has some frostbite on his ears, but he'll recover. Lieutenant Morrison, the doctor paused. We had to amputate 3 toes. He's going home. His flying days are over. Robert closed his eyes. Jake had a wife and 3 kids. Now he was going home missing part of his foot because Robert had led them onto that glacier. And Lieutenant Chen, Robert asked, though he already knew the answer. His body was recovered yesterday. He'll be buried with full military honors. That night, Robert sat alone in the barracks and pulled Sarah's letter from his breast pocket. The paper was wrinkled and stained, but her words were still clear. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Come home safe so we can start our life together. He'd promised to come home safe. He'd broken that promise. He'd nearly died on a glacier because of his own bad decisions. Did he even deserve to see her now? Cap? Brad appeared in the doorway. You okay? No, Robert said honestly. Tommy's dead. Jake's crippled. And it's my fault. It's not your fault. It was the storm. It was bad luck. I made the call to keep flying, Robert interrupted. I made the call to follow that beacon. I made the call to land on the glacier. Every decision that led to Tommy's death was mine. Brad sat down beside him. You also made the call that saved 4 lives. If you'd tried to keep flying to England, we'd all be at the bottom of the ocean right now. You made the best decision you could with the information you had. Tell that to Tommy's family. I will, Brad said quietly. When I write to them, I'll tell them their son died because of bad weather and bad luck, not because of you. Robert didn't respond. He just stared at Sarah's letter and wondered if he'd ever be able to forgive himself. 2 weeks later, Robert was cleared to travel. They put him on a transport to England, the same destination he'd been trying to reach when everything went wrong. When he landed at the airfield outside London, Sarah was waiting. She saw him coming down the stairs from the aircraft and ran to him. Robert caught her in his arms and held her tight, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling her warmth against him. "You're alive," she whispered. "Thank God you're alive." "I'm sorry," Robert said. "I'm so sorry I'm late." She pulled back and looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "What happened to you out there?" Robert told her everything. The storm, the glacier, Tommy's death, the 8 days waiting for rescue. When he finished, Sarah was crying. "I thought I'd lost you," she said. "When they said your squadron was missing, I thought you were gone." "I almost was. But you're here now." She took his hands in hers. "You're here, and we're together, and that's all that matters." They were married 3 days later in a small church in London. Brad was Robert's best man. Danny and Marcus attended. Jake sent a telegram from the hospital in the States. "Congratulations. Dance once for me since I can't anymore." Robert and Sarah honeymooned for 1 week before he was ordered back to duty. The war didn't stop for weddings or trauma or guilt. He flew 23 more combat missions before the war ended. He survived them all, and every time he climbed into a cockpit, he thought about the 5 P-38s sitting on a glacier in Greenland. "We'll go back and get them," he told Brad after the war ended. "Once things settle down, we'll mount a recovery operation." "Sure, Cap," Brad said, "we'll get them." But they never did. The war ended, and everyone went home, and the P-38s were forgotten. The military classified them as lost in combat and moved on. Robert moved on too. He and Sarah settled in California. He became a commercial pilot. They had 3 children. Life continued. But Robert never forgot the glacier. And he never stopped wondering about those aircraft, sitting alone in the ice, waiting for someone to come back for them. 60 years would pass before anyone did. May 2003. Greenland. Dr. Jennifer Hayes stood on the edge of a massive glacier, staring at something impossible. She was a glaciologist studying climate change and ice melt patterns. For the past 3 months, she'd been documenting how rapidly the Greenland ice sheet was shrinking, but she'd never expected to find this. Jutting out of the ice, twisted and corroded but unmistakable, was the tail section of a World War II aircraft. "Oh my God," she whispered. She radioed back to base camp. "I've found something. You need to see this." Within hours, a team arrived with excavation equipment. They carefully melted away the ice surrounding the wreckage, revealing more and more of the aircraft. A P-38 Lightning, perfectly preserved under 260 feet of ice for 60 years. "There's more," one of the team members shouted. "I've got another aircraft over here." By the end of the week, they'd located all 5 P-38s, scattered across a half-mile radius. The glacier had swallowed them completely in the decades since they'd landed, burying them under hundreds of feet of ice and snow. Only now, as climate change caused the glacier to melt at unprecedented rates, were they finally being revealed. "This is incredible, Doctor," Hayes said, photographing everything. "These aircraft are in remarkable condition. The cold preserved them." "Can we recover them?" someone asked. "Maybe, but it'll take a massive operation, heavy equipment, specialized teams, months of work." The discovery made international news. "Lost squadron found after 60 years," the headlines read. Historians scrambled to identify the aircraft and track down the pilots. That's when they found Robert Wilson. He was 84 years old, living in a retirement community in San Diego. When the reporter called and told him they'd found the P-38s, Robert couldn't speak for a full minute. "You found them," he finally whispered. "After all this time?" "Yes, sir. All 5 aircraft. They're buried in the ice, but they're there." "And Tommy, did you find Tommy's plane?" "We found wreckage consistent with an explosion about a mile from the others. We believe that's Lieutenant Chen's aircraft." Robert closed his eyes. Tommy Chen, dead at 22. His body had been recovered in 1943, but his aircraft had remained on the glacier, a metal tombstone, marking where he died. "Mr. Wilson, would you be willing to come to Greenland? We're planning a recovery operation, and we'd like you to be there." Robert looked at the photograph on his wall, his wedding photo with Sarah. She'd passed away 2 years ago after 60 years of marriage. 3 children, 7 grandchildren, 2 great-grandchildren, a good life, a full life. But part of him had never left that glacier. "Yes," Robert said, "I'll come." 3 months later, Robert stood on the ice once again. The glacier had changed, melted back significantly from where it had been in 1943, but the cold was the same, the wind was the same, the memories were the same. The recovery team had managed to excavate one of the P-38s completely. It sat on the ice, corroded and damaged, but still recognizable. Robert walked up to it slowly, his hand reaching out to touch the cold metal. "This was Brad's plane," he said. "I remember because he had a dent in the left engine cowling from a rough landing in Iceland." Is Brad still alive? Dr. Hayes asked gently. No, he died in 1987. Heart attack. Robert ran his hand along the fuselage. Danny died in 95. Marcus in 2000. Jake made it to 2001. I'm the last one left. I'm sorry. Don't be. Robert smiled sadly. We all got to go home. We all got to live our lives. Tommy didn't. That's who you should be sorry for. They spent 3 days on the glacier. The recovery team documented everything, took measurements, made plans for eventually transporting the aircraft to museums. Robert told them stories about each plane, each pilot, each moment of those 8 days waiting for rescue. On the last day, they held a small ceremony at the site where Tommy's plane had crashed. Robert placed a wreath on the ice and saluted. Rest easy, Lieutenant, he said. Your squadron's been found. You're not forgotten. That night back at base camp, a reporter asked Robert what it felt like to see the aircraft again after 60 years. Like closing a circle, Robert said. We left them here in 1943. Part of me never left. Now I can finally say goodbye. Do you have any regrets about that day? About the decisions you made? Robert thought about it for a long time. I regret that Tommy died. I regret that Jake lost his toes. I regret that we got caught in that storm in the first place. But the decision to land on the glacier? No, I don't regret that. It saved 4 lives. Sometimes in war, that's the best you can do. The reporter scribbled notes. One more question, Mr. Wilson. If you could go back and do it all again, would you change anything? Robert looked out the window at the glacier, at the 5 P-38s slowly emerging from the ice like ghosts from the past. No, he said finally. I wouldn't change a thing. November 2003, San Diego, California. Robert Wilson sat in his living room, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, watching the news. The first P-38 from the Lost Squadron had been successfully recovered and transported to a museum in Kentucky. The restoration team estimated it would take 5 years to fully restore the aircraft to flying condition. That's your plane, Grandpa? His youngest granddaughter asked. No, sweetheart, that's Brad's plane. Mine is still in the ice. Will they get yours too? Maybe someday, but it doesn't matter. The important thing is that people remember. Remember the men who flew those planes. Remember what they sacrificed. His daughter squeezed his hand. We remember, Dad. We'll always remember. That night, Robert dreamed of the glacier. But this time, it wasn't a nightmare. He dreamed of standing on the ice with Brad and Danny and Marcus and Jake and Tommy, all of them young again, all of them whole. We made it, Cap, Brad said in the dream. We all made it home. Not all of us, Robert said, looking at Tommy. Tommy smiled. I made it too, just took a different route. Robert woke up with tears on his face. But they weren't sad tears. They were tears of peace. He'd carried the guilt of that day for 60 years, but maybe it was time to let it go. Maybe it was time to accept that he'd done the best he could with an impossible situation. Maybe it was time to forgive himself. Robert got out of bed and walked to his desk. He pulled out a piece of paper and began to write. To the families of the Lost Squadron, for 60 years I have carried the weight of October 15th, 1943. I have replayed every decision, questioned every choice, wondered if I could have done something differently to save Lieutenant Chen's life or prevent Lieutenant Morrison's injury. But I have come to realize that we cannot change the past. We can only honor it. And the best way to honor the men of the Lost Squadron is to remember them, not for how they died, but for how they lived. They were brave. They were skilled. They were willing to sacrifice everything for their country. And when faced with an impossible situation, they did not give up. They fought to survive. They supported each other. They held on to hope even when hope seemed lost. That is their legacy. Not the glacier, not the crash, not the 8 days of suffering, but the courage they showed in the face of death. I am proud to have served with them. I am honored to have led them. And I will carry their memory with me for whatever time I have left. Captain Robert Wilson, U.S. Army Air Forces, Retito. He folded the letter and put it in an envelope. Tomorrow, he would send it to the museum where Brad's P-38 was being restored. They could display it alongside the aircraft so that everyone who saw the plane would know the story of the men who flew it. Robert looked at the photograph on his desk. The 6 pilots standing in front of their P-38s in Iceland, October 15th, 1943. Young, confident, ready to conquer the world. They'd had no idea what was waiting for them. No idea that in a few hours they'd be fighting for their lives on a glacier. No idea that 60 years later their story would still be told. "We did good, boys," Robert said to the photograph. "We did real good." Outside, the California sun was rising. Robert watched it climb into the sky, golden and warm and full of promise. He was 84 years old. He'd lived a long life, a good life, and when his time came, he knew where he wanted to be buried. Not in California, not in a military cemetery, but in Greenland, on the glacier, with his squadron, where he'd always belonged.